about the pocket and development. And I want to start off by really centering this issue around some of our most vulnerable states, giving an example of Tuvalu that is threatened by rising sea levels. And we know that there has been an unprecedented example of an agreement that we've seen with the government of Australia that provides refuge for climate-displaced Tuvaluans that was reached. And this, I believe, it really foreshadows what we know as geopolitical and economic shifts. And it really sets pace for what we are to see as what is the future for the world. So to really get us started, Madam Prime Minister, we know that the Republic of Bangladesh has been really susceptible to climate shocks, despite only producing 0.56% of global emissions. And you have been susceptible to cyclones and terrible floods, and we have seen the devastating economic setbacks in Bangladesh. Let's get started with those big COP28 outcomes, loss and damage. You know, how should the loss and damage fund, as approved, and we've seen the contributions by the UAE, how should it be implemented and operationalized to meet its ambitions, and how should that finance goal be met and adopted to benefit countries like Bangladesh? I started with the big question.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I want to tell you some story of a country. Well, I thank you for raising these critical issues for climate vulnerable countries like Bangladesh and also Maldives and other countries, a small island country, many other countries. Well, our countries have made considerable progress in human development, but it remains a challenge for us to make our hard-earned gains climate resilient. As President Macron of France said, developing countries must not be in a position to make a choice between poverty alleviation and climate action. For most low and middle income countries, the overriding priority is to invest in climate adaptation to save lives and livelihoods. On the other hand, if we want to reduce greenhouse gas emission, we need ambitious climate mitigation commitments by large emitting countries. We all recognize the need for substantially scaling up the current level of international climate financing for investments in mitigation and adaptation. Regrettably, the climate financing committed and available so far remains severely insufficient. In this, further complicated by the absence of an internationally agreed definition of climate financing and its accounting methods. I had my first realization about the resource constraint for climate action at COP15 in Copenhagen, 2009. I was in the core committee. I was part of a closed-door meeting of leaders to find a last-minute solution. While looking around the table, it struck me that international climate finance would be quite difficult to come by. After going back home, I took the initiative to set up the Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund to undertake homegrown adaptation projects. Bangladesh is now considered a living laboratory of locally led climate adaptation. So far, we have implemented nearly 800 projects at a cost of US $480 million, and all from our own resources. This is, however, still inadequate compared to the US $7 to $8 billion that we require every year to implement our national adaptation plan. To put things in perspective, the current financing need for mitigation as per all the nationally determined contributions, NDC, is estimated at nearly $6 trillion up to 2030. For adaptation, it is $215 to 387 billion per annum until 2030. It is obvious that the widening financing gap is further aggravating the global climate crisis. But we cannot simply afford to allow the global temperature to rise above 1.5 Celsius as agreed at COP28 in Dubai. We cannot go back on our commitment to move towards the net zero future at differentiated timeline for developed and developing countries. We must find solution to unlocking climate financing to keep us on track by delivering on the following 6 suggestions. First, developed countries must live up to their commitment of $100 billion per annum in the 2 years up to 2025 based on a delivery plan. And by the end of this year, we must all agree on a new climate financing target post 2025, preferably above $100 billion on the basis of scientific evidence. Second, the world needs to get rid of wars and conflicts, illegal occupations, and mindless killings of unarmed civilians, especially women and children, as we watch in Gaza and elsewhere. The impacts of sanctions and counter-sanctions are felt far away from the scene of the conflicts. Senseless arms race must be stopped, and resources need to be diverted instead of mobilizing the much-needed fund for fighting climate change. Let's keep in mind, when the existence of humanity is at stake, pursuing narrow interests would come to nothing. Third, the acute imbalance in financing for mitigation and adaptation needs to be addressed by the least doubling the current level of adaptation financing. In this context, I again thank President Macron for committing to provide euros 1 billion to Bangladesh for supporting adaptation. Fourth, the long pending issue of streamlining access to existing international climate funds by developing countries must be resolved, including by investing in their capacity. In case of Bangladesh, we only have 2 eligible entities to get financing from the Green Climate Fund, with 2 more in the process. Okay. Fifth, the reforms of the global financing architecture must show meaningful results, especially in managing the debt burden of climate vulnerable countries by expanding their access to grant and occasional loans. And finally, government needs to invest in the right plans, policies, and instruments to mobilize private capital flows for climate action. In parallel, international financing institutions need to develop innovative blended financing mechanism to attend private capital for bankable projects. It is evident that the large climate financing gap cannot be addressed without effective private sector participation. The loss and damage, the decision have taken, but it is my experience that time and again we are taking many decisions. Right. But the main thing is how much it is implementing, or the developed country, how much they are contributing or coming forward. I want to see that. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. I was going to say I was there in Copenhagen, and I remember very much those decisions, and we were quite hopeful. But you mentioned something quite important about spending your own money to deal with the repercussions of climate shocks. And as a member of the V20, I know that the V20 does a lot of advocacy work on behalf of all of their V20 members, and Barbados will be taking over the presidency of the V20. Prime Minister Mia Mottley has been a very staunch advocate of the global financial architecture reform, and she co-hosted the Paris Summit, in short. And has been leading this Bridgetown agenda that brings together this nexus of debt sustainability, of climate action and development. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and the evolution of the Bridgetown agenda?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. There can be no false dichotomy between people and planet. You can't seek to save us from the climate without dealing with poverty and other SDGs. And one of the things that we recognize from early is just as carbon dioxide and methane destroy the climate, you need oxygen to survive. And the oxygen this time is the financial capital first and foremost. Doesn't mean that we don't have to address other issues like trade and access and joint procurement, but finance is the first thing that begins to unlock it. Why is there a problem? Global public debt has increased by 5 times since the year 2000, between 2000 and 2022. And look and see who is paying the price for it. Invariably, it's the vulnerable countries on the front line, many of whom have had increased debt, not of their own making, but of having to face not just the climate crisis, but indeed international economic terms like those created with the WTO and others, without a sensitivity to their peculiar conditions.
Right.
Secondly, the global financial architecture has not been structured to address their needs, and in fact penalizes them more for being vulnerable rather than helping them and lifting them out of vulnerability and marginalization with respect to financing. Why do I say so? A poor country and poor people can't come out of poverty without access to education, without access to protections in healthcare, without access to all of the basic things we know will give the economy's capacity to grow. At the same time, our economies and countries cannot fight the climate crisis nor the environmental degradation if there's no fiscal space and if debt is too high. So that we've reached this point where for the last few years we know what we have to do, but we're not doing it fast enough. We need to lower and level the cost of debt for all countries because the global climate crisis is global. It's not regional, it's not sectoral. Secondly, we need to recognize that this notion of short-term debt, as I've said over and over, cannot help either in terms of adaptation, or indeed in terms of SDG financing and poverty reduction. So that we need to create, not just for climate, but perhaps for all global public goods, a concessional window that is not the same as either for poor countries, who must continue, in my view, to get more grant, but for lower and middle income countries, something that is quasi-IDA, that perhaps is 40-year debt and a little more expensive, but allows countries to have a longer trajectory and to be able to build the capacity to repay the debt that it has. Similarly, we need blended capital, and the reality is that unless we start to change our expectations, the belief that the public money is just going to drop out of the sky, it's not happening. And with each year, we're closer and closer to the date with Armageddon. So how do we ensure that we have a different understanding as to where money can come from? Yes, those countries that continue to cause the crisis must continue to step up to the plate. But there are a number of activities that have remained immune, and we need to address it. Whether it is the excess windfall profits of those who helped contribute to the climate crisis, whether it is international shipping, whether it is small percentages that will not bankrupt any single company, but will add value to the loss and damage fund and also the adaptation funding. I want to salute UAE for allowing us to at least get the financing for the loss and damage fund off, but it is still under $1 billion. And equally, we need to get the Europeans and others who have to be able to appoint their persons to let us get going, because all we're doing is playing a waiting game until we can get going. But we can't focus only on loss and damage because adaptation remains at the core still. And therefore, unless we find a mechanism for financing global public goods, that in my view is a tripartite mechanism, public money, money from multinational corporations and citizens, and thirdly, a compact with philanthropic capital as to how they can not only spend money on what they like, but spend money on what the world needs, even if it is a small percentage of what they have. Now, if those can't work, put something else on the table. But what we are not doing is advancing the quantum, because while it is oxygen, after we get the oxygen, we still have to do the structural transformation, we still have to do the execution of the projects, and therefore the finance is not the destination. But the longer we take to get it, the more impossible it is going to be for us to be successful in adapting and also maintaining development. Because as I said, you can solve and make the country better, but by the time you do it, if the people are suffering and falling through poverty, the poverty trap, what have you achieved?
Right.
So I'll pause there.
Funny enough, the Stern Review, I think of 95, said we need to act now, even if the cost is minimal, to avoid a much bigger cost in the future. And that was in 95, I believe.
I think we have a global governance deficit in terms of not having a mechanism that allows for the kind of coordinated decision-making that's necessary. I was told recently today that there's a troika that has been established that will see the former chair, the current chair, and the future chair of COP work together to ensure continuity. That is a step in the right direction. But we can't be means that technology allows us the capacity for more effective decision-making, more effective meetings, and to be able to bring together the key players that will allow for the kind of decision-making. We're already handicapped by the difficulties of geopolitics and domestic politics. Don't add to it by not having appropriate governance mechanisms.
All right, I'll park that idea of a compact and that collaboration for our second round of questions. And Minister, I'll come over to you now. The Prime Minister has mentioned several layers of the kind of financial flows we must see from grants to private-public partnerships. And I want to hear from you, what's the quality, the level of quality of finance that we want to see, especially when we look at small island states? What is required and the scale of investment for nation states like yourselves?
Thank you very much, Excellency. I think the big question here is, are we ready for this? I think UAE at the COP28, there was good leadership, and then we agreed on the loss and damage fund, and then now we are waiting how the disbursements will be. The bottom line here is actually, like Prime Minister Hasina has said, today we keep on spending money which might have been spent on hospitals. I'm talking about the SIDS, small island nations like ourselves, hospitals, schools, but now we have to spend that money on adaptation measures. Like the Prime Minister said, I think we are, we emit less than 0.003% of the global emission, but we are the most hit. So people need to come to the realization that more need to be done. Now today, if we try to access the finance from this, for example, the Green Fund, Maldives has got 20 projects in the pipeline, for which 3 has been approved. The process is so long, but for countries, small countries like ourselves, It's actually very little bureaucracy, very little red carpet. So we are there, but the resources are not there to access these funds. So I think that's the gap that we are talking about. And again, for example, for the Maldives, now our renewable energy production is 4% of our consumption, but we have a target of 33% in the next 5 years. Now we are short of $600 million, but accessing these funds is within these 5 years. If we are able to do that, we will be able to achieve those goals that we have been trying to achieve. Now, the other question is actually the quality of financing, the funding that is being that's available. It's really that are being available really too late to reach us. For example, if you spend $1 today, and we will be saving $15 tomorrow. But what is happening now currently is actually we keep on delaying things until we have to spend the $15 that we have that issue actually. I mean, every year we keep facing this. Another problem is actually small countries like Maldives. We have a population of 550,000 spread over more than 180 islands. So bankability of any of these projects is a very big challenge for us because it has to be profitable. Now, I think profitability and the bankability itself need to be redefined when you talk about the challenges that we have. Now, I think this is one challenge that we have always been advocating. And again, like we said, Maldives in the today when I was coming in, one journalist asked me how is the climate change affecting the Maldives. That it's real. It's there. The storm surges are there. The rains are there. The high winds are there, and it's damaging. So how are we adapting? We are building new islands where measures are there to be safe. And I think everyone remembers in the Indian Ocean tsunami, we were very badly hit. And then we had a pilot project where we built a safe island. And today we see, even with the climate change, some of these islands are very safe.
Right.
So, but we need, so we have projects in the pipeline, but accessing to these finances is the challenge.
Right.
And like I said, 3 years is a long time to stay because by 3 years, things change. They take a different route.
Yes. I think for island states like yourselves, it's not only about energy and infrastructural projects, it's also about the maintenance of your corals and, the oceans, and ensuring that the shipping industries are seeing themselves as part and parcel of maintenance of the ocean industry in itself. So how do they feature as part of your NDCs as you prepare for your submission for 2025?
In the past, actually, even today, again, one of the challenges that we have is, are you going to be there? Some people ask me today, are you going to be there? Yes. We have a different approach. We're not moving out of Maldives. Like I said, 550,000 Maldivians, plus we have expatriates, about 200,000, and then again, visiting tourists of about 200,000 at a given time. We're not moving out of Maldives, so we just need to change. So we have these priorities put in place where we need to adapt ourselves and then make sure that we keep. If you look at Maldivian tourism, if you look at Maldivian fishery, these are the most sustainable practices that has been put in place.
Right.
But if you look at the long term, because there has been no action taken, the long term value of those assets that we have created in the past is going to go down tremendously. I mean, if you look at the developed countries, they have access to development funding. Again, so many funding opportunities are there. But for Maldives, a small island nations, it's not there. The access is difficult. So even if we put on a target, it's really, you have, again, like at the start of my intervention, like I said, it's the money that should have gone into development of our people, going into these projects. That's the reason.
Right.
But I think Maldives says this. It's inevitable. We go through this.
Yeah. I think that was more of a nudge to open an invitation to visit the Maldives.
Well, I think...
No, it's fine, Minister.
Yes, visiting Maldives is definitely, people will understand how it is. Okay, people ask me, is there sea level rise? Well, climate change is real.
Yeah.
We see the storm surges, we see rains, and we see more wind.
Yes, thank you, Minister. Secretary Carey, we heard the issues of, how expensive it is to get the right infrastructure in place. We heard the various challenges, but there have been such good outcomes that came out of COP28 that I want to profile as well. Off the bat, I started with the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, but there were also some commitments and pledges around the tripling of renewables and double energy efficiency by 2030, involving well over 210 countries at COP28. Additionally, a commitment to triple nuclear energy by 2050 was made by 20 countries. Now, we are all curious what all of this means. What does the pledge by 210 countries mean? And we know that we are going to need $4.3 trillion annually in order to really roll out that tripling of renewable energy in developing countries by 2030. Where is that money going to come from? In an agile manner, in a quality manner, and in an affordable manner?
I think I'm going to go next door.
No pressure.
Look, let me, first of all, Buhola, thank you so much. And my friends assembled on this stage represent the hard places, the toughest, most abused, obviously Bangladesh, most vulnerable of countries, and Barbados and Maldives under siege. So how are we going to do this? What are we really going to do and get this done? Well, first of all, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber is sitting here with his team, and I would begin by saying thank you to them for the transition that they helped pull together so dramatically in Dubai, because Dubai really has set the stage for us unleashing a much more significant effort to be able to solve every one of the problems that was spoken by the Prime Minister and the Minister. I agree 100%. Everything they said is accurate and is a problem. But what happened in Dubai is that those 195, 200, whatever number of countries all agreed, built a consensus, the Dubai Consensus, that we must transition away from fossil fuels, that we have to do so in a fair, equitable, and orderly way, that we have to be able to achieve an acceleration in this decade, which is critical, also in keeping with so as to achieve net zero 2050 and be able ultimately to make the great difference here. And the only way this is going to happen, accelerating in this decade and doing this in keeping with the science, that's critical language. In keeping with the science means 1.5 degrees. 2050 net zero means everybody has to have a plan. And accelerating this decade is the only way we will begin to get there. So this is a mandate that goes way beyond Paris. And it wouldn't have happened without Paris, but it goes way beyond Paris. Now, the mandate isn't enough. We could wind up in Baku, and these are just words on a piece of paper. Unless we address the concerns that were expressed here. Everything that now needs to be done, if you have that consensus, everything that has to be done is fundamentally implementation. That means finding the money. Now, you have both said, both prime ministers have said, if we don't find trillions, not billions, we're not going to get there. I can proudly sit here today and say, you know, President Biden came in and he doubled at first the amount for adaptation, then he quadrupled it, and now he's set a goal of $11 billion. He's at $9.5 billion right now, and there are a whole lot of other initiatives ranging from $3 billion for the GCF, $1 billion for methane, $1 billion for women to be able, gender-based, but none of it, folks, is going to get the job done because we need the trillions. So how do we get the trillions? So, you know, that's where I think the whole effort now really has to go into finding ways to create the bankable deals more effectively, finding ways to leverage. We have an energy transition accelerator, which is a mechanism for offsets and credits, which is one way to raise money we don't have today. Another is obviously by crowding in money, creating a viable bankable situation, which we can do by putting some public money on the table, some private money on the table, and being able to leverage outcomes. Now, the UAE actually put forward some pretty daring proposals about putting some of this money into play. It's well known that I'm leaving this job, but I feel very strongly that I'm not going to leave the issue because the key is getting the finance. So how do we get it? We have to get more of the developed world to leverage more funding. We also have to find the bankable deals out there. You know, if you're building infrastructure for adaptation, much of that infrastructure for adaptation is also revenue producing. If it's revenue producing, you can go to the market and you can actually raise a lot more money. And so philanthropies joining with public money can offset risk, and then you can begin to put some of those trillions to work. Now, the only people who have those trillions is the private sector. No government has enough money to be able to win this battle. So I think we got to stop kidding around now. We've got to figure out the best way possible to be able to accelerate the deployment of the trillions, whether it's BlackRock or, you know, asset managers or asset owners or whoever it is. They've got to have confidence that if they go out there, they're going to be able to get some return on that investment or mitigate against the loss one way or the other. That's what we've been working on doing with the First Movers Coalition, with Methane Pledge, with all of the things that we've done as separate initiatives. But honestly, the stage is set. And why is the stage set? Because all of those countries understood everything that they've talked about that's happening to them is going to get worse. It's going to get worse this year. Absolutely, according to the science, unless we do more, it's going to get worse next year and thereafter. And that's going to cost us billions of public money, dollars that could be going into exciting the private sector to crowd in to this fact. So I think we all understand the challenge. And we are poised to be able to actually go out and try to meet that challenge. And I think that's where the biggest effort of the developed world has to go, to make that money deploy. And if we do, we really can win the battle, because there's so many exciting things happening in new technologies that could be deployed. But deploying them is also going to cost money. So I think this is as defined as it's ever been. The challenge is as clear as it's ever been. The capacity to meet the challenge is as there as it has ever been. Now we just have to go out and do it.
Yeah, thank you. So credit enhancement tools are very important. It brings us to the issues of triple P in financing. But in order for us to crowd in the private sector, I think public funding needs to be prepared to lose like 10 cents in the dollar to get that to deal with that first loss.
Well, in some cases, yes, but not necessarily. Certainly not in every case at all. I mean, look, you know, in Egypt, in preparation for the previous COP, we made an agreement with the government of Egypt where we were able to raise about $500 million of public money, and we used that to leverage the closing of 11 gas-fired power plants with the deployment of 20 gigawatts of renewable energy, and we crowded in, tracted through the 500 million on the table, we were able to crowd in 10 billion of public and 10 billion of private money. The deal's gone forward. It's happening.
That's great.
Now, we can replicate that in any number of creative ways. Many people have talked about blended finance.
Yeah.
We worked on that in the JET-P with Indonesia and the JET-P with Vietnam, but I can't tell you that they've been raging successes because we haven't been able to unleash the larger sums of money that will make the difference for the investment.
Right.
So, look, I think that the stage, as I said, is set for us to be able to change the paradigm. And if we can work, and I know we will work with Prime Minister Mia Mottley, with Prime Minister Hasina and others to try to accelerate this.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry. So I know there's somebody dying to ask a question. Ineza Umuhoza, who's the founder and CEO of the Green Protector, has requested to ask a question to our esteemed panelist. Ineza?
Thank you so much. Maybe I can stand up.
Yes, please.
So since I started my engagement in the climate negotiation in 2018, I'm so happy to say that at least we are moving firmly in getting concrete hope for loss and damage, with the loss and damage fund and this funding arrangement being agreed at COP28. But however, I still wonder, there's a need to really move from climate aid to climate partnership for concrete action. So my question, the first question is, how will this be safely implemented in a manner that does not going to increase the debt, especially for developing countries who are and are still losing their GDP due to climate change impact? And how are the source of funding for the loss and damage fund going to be more than pledges, because we have learned the hard way from the 100 billion goal? So how can you give us quantifiable and concrete hope for the future? And the last is, as developing countries have done the work and have formulated commitment and tried to adjust their development path and budgets to address loss and damage and adaptation for the good of the planet and the people, now it's all about the developed countries. So my simple question to Special Envoy John Kelly, when we develop country going to step up, when is going to be the time, and how are you going to do it to meet all the agreement in the Paris?
Thank you, Ineza.
Thanks.
Well, I think I just described to you what President Biden is doing. I mean, remember, we had a president who pulled out of Paris and then zero funded it for 4 years. And when President Biden came in, his first mission to me and others was, please reestablish credibility for our country and help people to see that we're serious about getting this done. That's why President Biden made a pledge of $11 billion for the emergency adaptation program that he has created. He's put money on the table, and we are the largest humanitarian donor in the world. Has it all gone into climate? No. And that's part of the problem. We have ideological differences. We have a Congress that has to appropriate this money. There hasn't been that much money but we've been able to win the battles. Now there's $3 billion for the Green Climate Fund and so forth. But please, as I say to you, you said it's up to the developed countries. With all due respect, it's up to all of us. Developed countries need help from developing countries to be able to help provide assurances with respect to some of these expenditures, to provide a legal system that is going to be able to honor contracts, to be able to deal with arbitration if you have differences, to guarantee that the currencies won't be threatened. I mean, there are a lot of risks you have to deal with in this. And we need cooperation together to be able to make these things happen. But I am convinced we're in a different place than we've ever been in. I've been doing this since 1988 or whatever, and starting with Rio. And never have I seen as much momentum, as clear a mandate, and we can deploy these renewables now. That is a technology we have. And the IEA has told us, if we will just deploy enough of the renewables, wind and solar, not to mention hydro and geothermal, but just take wind and solar. We could accomplish our goal of a 43% reduction of emissions by 2030 if we just used that existing technology. That's doable. And we need more country cooperation around the world to say, hey, I'll go do that deployment rather than having to exploit the gas field or the oil field or so forth. And let's prove that there is a new paradigm for how we can approach this transition. This is the greatest transition economically the world has ever known since the Industrial Revolution. And unbelievable numbers of jobs can be created. And they can be created indigenously in these places where we are investing. You know, in the US last year, 3.9% growth in clean energy jobs. In regular energy jobs, only 3.1% for the first time ever. Renewables are outpacing the deployment of people and of money in terms of investment. Likewise for investment, 1.8 trillion was put into venture capital for a clean energy economy. Only 1 trillion was invested, it's still a lot of money, but 1 trillion compared to the 1.8 was invested in fossil fuels. That is the beginning of a trend which Fatih Birol and the IEA have documented, where in the next few years, there is a terminal decline in demand for fossil fuel that will begin to behold, and that's going to affect analysts on Wall Street. I know the folks in the UAE have looked at this, and part of the reason for the things they've been doing at home, as well as encouraging in the context of the COP, is based on those realities of where we're headed. So that's how I think it changes. Everybody has a stake in this, and everybody has a role to play, and we cannot put more debt on the Global South. Debt has to be part of the equation by which we are transitioning.
Right. So there's so many burning questions, but I'm being told that we're out of time. So I've been given one more person to ask a question, who is Kushal Raj, who's a Pacific Policy Director, Conservation International, and also a Munich Young Leader 2024. Is this person in the room?
Yes, thank you, moderator. And Bula Vinaka from Fiji. My question to the very esteemed panel, and of course I've done previous negotiations for the Fiji government, is that we talk a lot about private sector engagement and the so-called financing that's available with private sector, but this is not the case for small and developing states, in particular for Fiji, and the Honorable Minister from Maldives would agree. So how do we unlock this private sector in seeds and small island states when there is no engagement? If anything, private sector relies on governments in these countries to actually get readiness support. So what does the Paris Convention or the basically convention provide to these private sectors, and how do we continue to be on the playing field or the level playing field without missing out? And I'm talking about missing out in number of years. And secondly, quickly, just to link up, when we talk about renewable energies, we talk about the use of minerals, we talk about nuclear waste. While we do have the technology, at what cost does it come to environment? And in particular to Pacific Island countries where nuclear waste and dumping has been a practice of the past. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Yes, thank you. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the bankability, I think Secretary Kerry also mentioned that bankability is an issue for the private sector. So I think we need to stop looking at these projects from the traditional way that's the reason why Maldives and small island nations like Maldives and Fiji and many other are unable to reach these funds, because of the way this is done. It takes 3 years, like I said. But again, now there are new trends which are coming up. I think my predecessor at the UNGA introduced, when he was the president of the UNGA, I think that there was an initiative from the MVI. Instead of looking at the bankability and those issues from a GDP perspective, look at more innovative ways and then try to come up with this. So I think this is basically the problem there. I think all we know is actually, some people still think that, the small island nations are too small, so there are bigger problems for them. No, but the problem is it was created by somebody else, but we are the people who are suffering. I think that's the question which is coming now. So actually, what I believe is actually what happened in Dubai should not stay in Dubai. We should move on. I think I trust the Dubai presidency to take it to the next level and have this funding available. I think we have run short of time, and thank you very much.
We are out of time, and because I don't want you to be booted out of stage, I'm going to give one word. I'm going to ask you for literally one word. To close this conversation, what gives you hope?
Well, we always want to
One word,
be
Prime
hopeful.
Minister.
We always want to be hopeful, but it is my experience that developed countries not coming forward with the promised. They place the promise, but they don't fulfill. But this time, because it's a loss and damage fund, it has been started realizing. But for COP29, we want that it should be very pragmatic.
Okay. Prime Minister Modley.
Resilience, the innate resilience of human beings to rise above challenges. And the major challenge is, in fact, man-made institutions. So that if we can rise above that, then I do believe that we can come together in time to do what has to be done.
Thank you.
Change the way that we look at profitability, because that's not how we should be looking at it. When an island becomes safe, that should be considered as a profit.
Great. Secretary Kerry?
Innovation.
Innovation. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.